Welcome to the BILLWARDLIFE-CAST, formerly the UDRCast. Yeah, just a little continuation of lessons that I've learned and some of the story behind the story. Tamara and I were talking about off camera. A lot of people maybe hold me to a high regard, or people like me and expect us to be perfect, or expect me to be perfect on this journey because of the nature of like what it is that I'm doing and how I roll. But the honest truth is like I'm not perfect, and nobody is. And I think a big feature of like the work that I do with other people is I never expect people to do this perfectly. And they know that. And I never hold them to a standard of, you got to be perfect at this. If you listen to any of my old episodes where I talk about millimeter by millimeter by millimeter growth, that's how I did it. And that's how I continue to do it. It's not like, I want to change and it just happens overnight. I didn't come from an angry, violent man to like a nice, compassionate dude overnight. Like, this took many repeated humiliation experiences and a willingness to grow and learn and try to change through the pain. But I did have a desire to seek and do God's will, or grow in the image and likeness of my Creator. And, I would try to apply that millimeter by millimeter. And sometimes there was bigger jumps than a millimeter, and sometimes I would take steps backwards. And I still do. And, as I work in the prison system from time to time, and I work in different environments, these are the things that actually are attractive to some of the people that want to change. One of the things would be my swearing and, dealing with women and sex conduct and relationship conduct and marriage and my kids, and, sharing these little intimate, integrated stories have allowed people to ask questions and understand that it's okay to fuck it up and not do it perfectly. I think the only thing that's perfect about this is that we try perfectly. And even at that, that's still not perfect. So, as I carry on with this story here, I guess the topic in general is lessons again. It's more lessons. It's regular life. And what does it take to change? I often talk about like within the darkest parts of myself or yourself, there's a little piece of light in there, and that light is actually who you are. But we can't extract that light until we kind of crack through the dark. And a lot of the dark has layers to it. And it's painful to look at. Looking at aspects of ourselves that might be humiliating to others and to ourselves, because we're kind of based as creatures of being affected largely by social judgment. Some of the things that we may acknowledge or admit about ourselves are painful. But through that vulnerability, and not only with other people, the vulnerability with ourselves, but as we speak with others and we're vulnerable with others, we're actually being vulnerable with ourselves as well. Because it's really hard in some ways to be just vulnerable by yourself. Which is why I think, the fifth step in admitting to ourselves and to God and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. That talking with somebody else about these stories in our lives and how we maybe made mistakes, and really, if we're willing to grow and to learn, they're not really mistakes. They're experiences that we grow and we learn from. And, I finished off the last segment with, when working for God and his kids, often other people and God's kids, God and his kids want to work for you. I told you the story of my buddy who I asked if he would do, a logo design for me or some videos. And he wanted to do videos for me for YouTube. And this guy ended up doing like 40 or 30 videos for me. He ended up building all my platforms. He was so happy to be of service to me because I helped him change his life. And, that guy today he's just thriving. He's got a few kids, he's got a wife, he's married, his business is doing great. And, I can only take people so far. Anyone can only take someone so far. They got to do the work themselves. And, looking at my own life, I've done a lot of the work myself. And in some ways I have earned the right to say some of the things I do say. And, sometimes I put my foot in my mouth and I learn through humble pie as well. But at the end of the day, I think, in many respects, I still love myself, even though I might put my foot in my mouth. And so, there's times where I needed to move and I would put it out there, hey, can anyone help me move? 10 people would show up. And I only have a pickup truck worth of stuff to move. So it was pretty simple moves. But whenever I've asked for help, help's always been there. And so that saying, when you work for God and his kids want to work for you. Like it's not a selfish thing. It's just a result of. And so as I kind of continue on with my story here, and, I'm kind of moving along and trying to figure out what I'm doing and how I'm going to help our people and what my business is going to look like. I've been making these calls to chiefs and First Nations people, not feeling worthy that I've earned the right to be able to do that. I'm getting a couple little nibbles on that. I've been trying to just continue on with my character building through, learning my lessons through various jobs and driving different vehicles and, encountering different life circumstances and trying to figure out what the lessons are. And as I keep moving along, the universe keeps putting the stones in place so I can keep walking. And although back in those days, it just didn't seem like maybe it was the path, I just kept sharpening my intuition. And regardless of what other people said, I listened to what my intuition said more than what other people said. There was, I remember doing big book studies at year four. So I would go to this one meeting and I was broke and I had no job and I was putting on a big book study. And I had shared in the meeting that I didn't know where my next dollar was coming from, but I knew I had to figure out, something with this big book study and where to put it because I hadn't found a spot for it yet. And I was just being honest in the meeting. And then after the meeting, this old timer who always has an opinion, he came up to me and he started talking to me and he said, when are you going to get your priorities straight? He's like, you don't need to be worrying about helping anybody. You need to be figuring out where you can get a job and how you're going to live and put your next dollar to your next place you're going to live. And I just kind of took it from him and I didn't say anything. And, he left and we were done and I contemplated on my own and I was like, no, man, fuck that. I need to figure out where this big book study is going to be. And that's the main priority right now. And you know what? I figured out where that study was going to be and I continued to do that study. And, lots of people came and I figured it all out. I don't know where I ended up moving or what ended up happening at that moment, but it all got sorted out. And I really believe it got sorted out because I put my service hat on first and I was willing to help God's kids before helping myself. And, in our book, it says common sense thus becomes uncommon sense. That's been the story of my recovery. And that's a good little example. Maybe I should have, in normal thinking, figured out what I was going to do with my own living arrangements and not be doing a big book study to help other people. Well, I did the opposite and it all worked out. And even through all of those times where, I was getting some donations and people were giving me money and, it was because I kept serving and I was sponsoring and I was helping and I was doing things. And the reason why Buddy wanted to deposit $1,000 into my account every month was because he saw the work that I had done and that I just did selflessly. And I never asked for any of that money, and I still don't ask for money, and people still want to do those types of things for me. And I'm not here to say don't do that, because if your spirit of giving is that, then I'm going to accept that spirit of giving. You know, I also had a teacher, and he would say, never take money for any of the ceremonies that you do or that I do. He was speaking from personal. I don't take any money at all ever for any ceremonies I do. I said, well, what if I wanted to give you the money and the spirit was thank you for helping me with my life? And I gave you some prints and $100. He says, I wouldn't take it. And I'm like, but you're disrupting the circle of giving, because my intention is pure and I want to give you that money to help with like your wood, you know, chopping of the wood or ordering wood or the feast that you put on, or, you know, it costs money to put these ceremonies on, and why can't I give you that money? And he never would agree with me. And so we had that conversation numerous times, and you know what? 5 years later, we had the conversation again, and he had actually changed his tune. Because I really believe if your intention in your heart is pure and you want to give whatever it is, then it's okay to give, and the receiver should reciprocate that spirit of the money or whatever it is that you're gifting them, to keep the circle going and not break that circle of reciprocation. And I'm pretty sure there's a native teaching in that area, but I don't know it. But, you know, so, you know, kind of along the journey, I haven't talked much about like the native aspects of like the growing and the learning that I had done through all of the, you know, the practical physical world experiences that I'm giving you. But there was a lot of native parts of my journey, because when I first started this journey, I wasn't native. And as the journey's gone along and I've started connecting with my culture, and, you know, my buddy Paul took me to my first Sundance, and I started helping at a sweat, and, you know, I started asking Creator to show me how I could learn about my background. And Creator started teaching me and showing me, and I'd always go to these ceremonies in these spaces, and I would start asking a lot of questions, and, you know, probably too many questions, because of the way that I grew up in the world of the material and this colonialized way. It's about questions and answers. Whereas I found in our culture, it's about showing up and experiencing and learning a lessons through whatever the experience might be. But I didn't know that yet. And like one of the things that I was learning when I was new to the culture was I was being taught the Blackfoot way, which is a great way. And I also was trying to like integrate how First Nations culture could be integrated into the work that I was doing or planning to do. And that was difficult to kind of figure that out, but it's all worked itself out, and I do that now, and it works well now. But after, you know, learning from the Blackfoots and me being like, oh, I don't need to learn from the Cree, even though I'm Cree. I don't need to learn from the Cree. I just need to learn the basic general principles of First Nations teachings and cultures, and that's good enough. And that's what I believed. And then as I prayed for a Cree teacher, because I was Cree, I started changing. So my belief of like, oh, it's all good, it's the same. Well, it is the same, but it's not the same. And today I really value my Cree teachings. And I really value Blackfoot teachings. But I'm Cree, so I kind of lean towards that direction. And I want to learn more about how my ancestors, my grandfathers and grandmothers, how they did things. Where I come from, which is Driftpile Cree Nation in northern Alberta, which I haven't spent much time at. And another thing that, you know, has happened to me is I don't know any of my Cree family. I spent most of my life never knowing anyone Cree in my life. And I didn't know an Indian, let alone a Cree, till I was 42 or 43 years old. So like this whole experience of finding my indigenous side of me has just been it's been a trip. And, today I know probably way too many Indians. I say that jokingly. But, as I've gone along this journey, like my native side and all the teachings and everything that's happened on the native end of it, it's been very powerful also. My first time that I ever was thinking about sundancing, I went to my teacher and I said, do you think I should sundance? And he's like, I don't know. He says, why don't you take it to the hill and fast and ask Creator? I'm like, oh, okay. Fasting, what's that? And, he explained everything, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And I went and did it. And the answer that I got on my first fast was, no, you're not ready to dance. And so I didn't dance. But he gave me a few other answers. And some of those other answers were what I needed to try to heal some aspects of me so that I could get the answer to heal. And I remember, I was working with my sponsor back then. This old guy, he was pretty gruff and very wise, and he had sundanced when he was young. He's a white guy, but he was a sun dancer, and he had that native spirit, but he was pretty rough and rugged and raw, and he would always call me on my shit. And I remember doing step work at his place one day, and he asked me about, how the fast went and all this kind of stuff, and I said, yeah, it went great, and I was told not to dance, and he's like, okay. And then we kept going, we were doing the work, and we were doing some serious deep diving in my life. We were working out of another 12-step book that went really, really deep within me. And he knew that I was kind of on a mission to try to work for God or Creator. And he was really trying to help me fulfill that mission. And part of his job was to teach me. And so as we were working together, a couple months after sundancing, and the work we had done, it was in a session with him where I got that intuitive thought and decision that says, you're gonna fast and you're gonna dance. And I remember mid-session saying, hey, I got the answer. And he's like, what answer? I said, I got the answer that I'm supposed to dance. He's like, okay. So I had to wait for 9 or 10 more months, but I got to that point and I was ready to dance. So the answers come as long as I'm patient and I'm working on clearing the channel. And again, I guess my point is I'm sharpening intuition as I go along and do this work. And a part of me sharpening that intuition is working with my sponsor or my spiritual advisors, my elder, and then me also working with other people. Because as I work with other people, I build some deep compassion and understanding, and my judgment goes away. Because I start understanding that they're just like me. And as I kind of go through all of these stories, in my mind, I see all of these spots of my journey. And I'm going to say the first 5 years of all of these pieces of the puzzle, they're a little bit scattered. And especially the first couple of years, the puzzle pieces are really scattered. And, as I kind of gained some sanity over the years in my recovery, the pieces fit a little better. And so sometimes in my sharing, you might hear slightly different versions of kind of maybe what had happened, because I do get the stories mixed up a little bit, and maybe how something totally went down, but the lesson, I guess, really doesn't really change. So as you hear my episodes, and maybe way back or now or in the future, and you hear a little bit of inconsistencies, I hope that you don't judge me for bullshitting or, being dishonest, because that's not my intent at all. I just can't remember everything all the time exactly the way it happened, because early in my recovery, my brain was just kind of coming out of hock, and later in my recovery, like now, I'm just not one to remember things that well. But I do remember the specifics about, I guess, some of the lessons that I've learned. And so I'm just going into my head here right now to try to figure out what it is on that journey that needs to come out and be talked about here. And as I walk through that piece of, working for God and his kids and people helping me, and I keep helping people and people keep helping me. And I get down the road, there was a spot where I'm kind of trying to find like a path for the business. I'm trying to find a path for the native culture piece. And I had just moved into a house, and I had a mattress on the floor, and I didn't have too many things. That was the first time I moved into anywhere where I needed furniture in my recovery. Everywhere else has been fully furnished. And I was reading a bunch of books. I was reading Letting Go and Power versus Force, and those books have been phenomenally important in my recovery. And so back then I was listening to a lot of audio on YouTube, spiritual audio, different things, just really trying to get my brain clicking, reading these books, trying to find answers because I didn't know what I was doing. I remember one night before bed, I got on my knees and I asked Creator, I said, hey, I'm going to go to sleep tonight, and I was wondering if you can show me something in my dreams. Are you able to show me something in my dreams about what the native path might look like? Because I have no idea how this fits into the scheme of what I'm trying to do. And the thing about me with dreams and native dreams is I'm not one of those natives that gets a lot of dreams. A lot of natives get dreams and they get answers in their dreams, and they have dreams of sun dancing or sweating or different certain things kind of come up in their dreams, and seeing bears, seeing buffaloes, seeing eagles or whatever. I'm the guy that doesn't really get many of those types of dreams. And so this attempt on my knees to ask specifically for some native direction was basically probably my first time, really. And then I went to bed that night. And then I must have been about 6 a.m. And it was like I was kind of like cognizant, and the other side was still in deep sleep. And so I'm having this dream, and the dream is what it is that I asked for that night. And I can see these pictures, like it was like 1,000 pictures of like what it is going to be and how's it going to be. And a lot of it was native stuff, and a lot of it was program stuff, and a lot of it was, helping people. And there was just so many pictures flashing through my brain. And as this dream is going on, I was like, whoa, there's the dream. You're having the dream right now. And another part of me was like, okay, don't worry about it. Just, you always remember your dreams. Just remember it and take all the information, so when you wake up, you got it. And another part of me is like, bro, you never fucking remember your dreams. Get up and write this down. And I'm like, the other side's like, no, don't worry about it. The other side's like, no, you never remember your dreams. Get up and write this down. And that part of me was true, because I never remember my dreams. So I jumped out of bed, and I had a notebook and notepads there, and I started writing down every single thing that came out of that dream that I could remember. And as quick as I started writing everything down, by the time I got to the end of my dream, I was already forgetting parts of the end of the dream. But I did get down a whole bunch of things. And basically what I got down, what the premise of the dream was, it was like, Bill, this is what you need to do. What you need to do is you need to take the message of the spiritual sickness, the spiritual malady, and you need to learn how to articulate that in a way where people can understand, so the people can hear the message through regular words and regular talk, and you can use your story and other people's story to share that message with your Indigenous people. And essentially, you're trying to create a spiritual awakening. And as I tie in the book, Power versus Force and Letting Go, Power versus Force talks a lot about low-level vibrations, and it starts with shame. And shame is a level of consciousness. And it's level number 20, and it's the closest proximity to death. And when I look at shame in the real world and I see what shame is, it's the closest where somebody would want to kill themselves. And then you get to guilt, which is just above shame. And guilt can harden into shame. And then it's apathy. And then it goes up from there, and there's anger, and there's, pride. And pride is actually vibrating at 170 in this book. But pride is still a low vibrational consciousness vibration. And pride is where our world sits. It's the mainstay of society, vibrates at 170, but it's still force. And then it gives all these descriptors of what this level of consciousness is, and all the ones below it and the ones above it. And so as I read about the consciousness levels above it, and I think the first one out of pride, which would have been 180 or 190, is willingness. And now you're into a spiritual principle. And the goal is to get like way up the chain. Love, I think, is at 500. And if a guy could live at love, which is a consciousness level, then they've probably done a ton of work. And so when I read these books and I kind of put the information on consciousness levels and what it looks like in real life, anger, violence, manipulation, cheating, lying, dishonorment of self, shame, guilt, all these low vibrational tendencies that we have of operating in our lives that we're literally powerless over, they actually dictate the outcomes of our lives. And I've learned what you are is what you receive, and what you will be and what you get. And so we bring those people into our lives through relationships or life circumstances. So, the power of attraction we talk about a lot in our society. You're attracting a lot of negative bullshit, basically. And the only way to kind of get rid of that stuff is to work hard with, I'm going to say, the power, and be willing to learn your lessons through those mistakes. And so the dream was about me explaining these things in a way where people could level up and how they could change and put themselves in a higher level of consciousness category, which I'm going to say is like a spiritual awakening. You're awakening who you are, and you're living with love and kindness and acceptance, but it takes a while to get there. And that was the mission on what I was going to do with our nation people. But then there was another part of the dream that was kind of just as important. And it was like a world spiritual awakening, and how that world spiritual awakening could happen. And so in my dream, at the end of the dream, I saw Netflix, and I saw some other aspects of what B was teaching me through the brain tap, and some of the other things he taught me. But I knew that this was about delivering a message on a wide scale where you could affect people to want to try to move in a direction that was conducive to a spiritual awakening. And a funny thing that happened about a year, no, was it a year? No, it was a few years. A few years ago from now, I was approached by a person who said, hey, we want to build a documentary, and we want to try to get it all over the world, and it has to do with First Nations culture. And we want to film you and some other people, and we want you to be the producer and help build this out. and maybe, you never know, it could get on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. And I was like, wow, no way. And so anyway, I started working in collaboration with this media company who followed myself and my good friend Robbie Daniels around, and a bunch of other people we kind of arranged interviews with. And that movie took basically 3 years to put together. And like right now we're on, the end of July 2026, and that movie should be coming out in, August or September of 2026. And we started doing that thing, I think, like right around 2023, the end of. And who knows, maybe that's a part of this. I don't know. Like, I don't really know much. But I will say this. I will say whatever the star is, whatever the mission is that I've been going towards, I don't really know exactly what the thing is. But I know that it has to do with service and helping. And I don't know what skill set it's going to use of mine. I don't know what business acumen. I don't know if it's going to use my business. Like, I don't know much, but the important thing is like I go towards that star. And as I go towards the star or whatever it is, the thing, I end up making jogs on the journey to it because life happens. Lessons need to be learned, so I take a sharp right and I learn a hard lesson. I get my bearings, I straighten out, I move forward towards that star, millimeter by millimeter. I'm growing in the right direction. I maybe even take a couple steps backwards from the star, but at the end of the day, the mission is the mission, and I'm going towards the star. And I think the important thing that I've learned is the thing is never the thing. So the thing isn't the movie. The thing isn't United Nations. The thing isn't anything. The thing is the mission. And whatever the journey is, and the rights and the lefts and the back steps towards the mission and the star, these are all experiences and lessons that help me build strength and fortitude to help carry out the mission better. And I think where I've gotten lost here and there on my journey is I've made the thing the thing. And being an entrepreneur and having this content and this podcast and being a business owner, sometimes it's so easy to make the thing the thing. So the job's not the thing. The movie's not the thing. The car or the truck isn't the thing. The final destination of the program isn't the thing. Like, nothing is really the thing. The thing actually develops itself through what I'm doing here right now for service and helping somebody. And I learned that lesson the hard way a couple of years ago when I started feeling like really, really shitty. I was stuck in self. But luckily, through prayer and meditation and my willingness to listen, the answer came and it said, bro, you're making the thing the thing. And I'm like, I am. Get back to the basics. Go help somebody. So I started helping people again, which I've always done, but I kind of ramped it up, and then everything started like rounding itself out again. So I guess that's a pretty big message from me these days, and has been for a long time. And you can ask my friend Audrey. It's one of my teachings, and I guess another one of my teachings through all of this is like, do what's hard. I have taken the hard path many ways. I've not gotten what I wanted. I have quit the jobs that were lucrative. I have not dated that girl or done these things because it was not the thing. It wasn't right. It didn't feel right. Even though I would have got some instant gratification from whatever it might be, the job, the money, the status, the validation, the woman. But I chose to fight against it. And sometimes when I fought against it, it wasn't like I wasn't tempted. I was tempted, and I did take the bait, and I might even consumed some of the bait. But at a certain point along that millimeter by millimeter journey, I learned that no, that's not the way. And then through the pain of the change and humiliation of a circumstance, I tried to let go of whatever it was. And I have been able to do that in many respects. And I'm still learning in other respects. So don't make the thing. Do what's hard. Makes your life easy. Building character is hard, but it makes your life easy. Tamara and I were talking about today about honesty, and she's like, when you're just honest, no matter what the case is, it usually makes it easier. And it does. But there might be a sacrifice or a seemingly sacrifice on the altar of the honesty because you won't get what you want. Or maybe you won't look a certain way. So it's only a seeming sacrifice because the real sacrifice is if you lie to kind of get what it is that you think you want, you dishonor yourself so you don't become truly who you are. So it's like a false sacrifice. And so, her and I have both learned that lesson many times. And I'm still learning it. And I'm still learning what the thing isn't. And try not to, I get caught up in that with the business and stuff, right? But I'm still trying. And to do what's easy makes my life hard. It's easy to do what's easy. It's easy to not get up in the morning and not take responsibility for my life. And it's easy to not make an amend. And it's easy to not care about my family and my kids or, my own character. It's easy to just fuck around and blame the world. It's easy to build resentment. It's easy to blame my ex-wife or my kids or my dad or my mom or, my native culture, me being blinded in my own life to not see things. It's easy to do all that. It's easy to lie to myself and make excuses. Where it's hard is honoring the excuses and calling them what they are. So I got to quit doing what's easy because it does make my life hard. And I guess part of the journey that I've been on is I think I've crossed, in many respects, I've got over the hump on that. Because as you kind of go down this road and you're doing all this work and a lot of it seems pointless and hard and doesn't even make sense because it doesn't make sense to the way that we've been brought up in the world and how to protect ourselves. But eventually you see that it makes really good sense and you know that the diamond lies within the lesson that's hard. And so after a while you seek doing what's hard because you know it's the easier way. Even with Mike, my buddy Mike, who does a lot of editing on these podcasts, he's in Nashville right now, and about 3 or 4 years ago, he was in Canmore, and him and I were kind of trying to find our paths together, but separately, right? And I had done a lot of things in my journey that were against the grain. And he was admirable to that. He liked that, and he thought that was amazing in me. And, some of the things that I've instilled in him was, you only live once. Take that chance. Use your intuition. If you got to quit the job that you feel secure in to go find your dreams, then you do what you got to do. And, and I'm not saying just cut all ties and be really stupid about the decisions you make and put yourself in harm's way. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is do the work, rely on your intuition, ask, wait for the answers, and the right answers will come when your own house is in order. And Mike's jumped off the cliff. He jumped off the cliff and made the move to Nashville, and, he's made his second album, and he ended up going out to Scotland, and had one of the coolest music producers produce one of his albums. And, Mike Todd music's a thing, and he's doing it. And so, it is infectious. And if I had him here on an interview, which you can find him and I doing an interview number back, he talks about this journey. And so it's nice to have these other people kind of doing what's hard along with you and taking their own chances and jumping off the cliff. And when I say jumping off the cliff, I mean like, you know, there's one who has all knowledge and power. That one is God. May you find him now, and may you trust him now. And sometimes, you know, hanging on to the security of what you think life is a big insecurity. And so jumping off the cliff and having full trust in God in your path and in your life is scary and hard. But in the same breath, it makes for an amazing fucking journey. It's an adventure, not knowing what's going to happen and how things are going to happen. And, you know, that's essentially my life even today. At 12 years in almost, and a business, and, you know, all the things that I have seemingly in place. I don't even know from day to day really what's going to happen. You know, month to month, I don't know for sure. But I do know if I keep staying in the present moment and serving the kids, the people, that it all works out. And even if I end up in my mom's basement one day, maybe that's in a month or two, because I'm homeless because of some circumstance, you know, I can honestly say that at least I know the mission doesn't change. And so regardless if I'm doing it this way or I do it that way, you know, I've learned that the mission doesn't change. And when the mission doesn't change, then nothing's out of place. And if nothing's out of place, then everything's perfectly in place. And it allows me to learn the lessons that I need to learn. So on that note, I'm going to cut this episode a little bit shorter. I got some things to do. I got to get prepared for ceremony. I got to pick some medicine here. And get my stuff in order so I can head out of town for 5 days and do the big commitment that I committed to a number of years ago. And so just want to say I love you guys, and I'm glad you're tuning in. And as I get through a lot of these life episodes of kind of what's been happening and how I got here, you know, there's kind of a point to it all. Can I tell you the exact point? No. But there is a point. So stay tuned and figure out the point along with me, and it's probably going to be pretty fucking awesome. Anyway, thank you. Hi. Have a great day. Bye.